Welcome back to End-to-End Web Development. In this video, we're going to explore nested collections and relationships. Be sure to like and subscribe and stay tuned. What's up, guys? Welcome back to End-to-End Web Development. In this one, I'm going to go through nested collections and relationships using the Collection-Proxy. So stay tuned, like and subscribe, and I'm just going to hop into the video. So the first thing I want to do is to go out and import the Collection-Proxy. And then I want to create a document for a user. And we're going to set that equal to the collection. And we want to set the collection name, and we're connecting to the user's collection. So because we're in Vue and we want to have reactivity on our proxy, I'm going to set our data to a reactive object. So I need to go and pull that in from Vue. So for this lesson, I want to go ahead and build the UI from scratch. I'm going to go ahead and open my console so we can see any type of logging. And to build out my UI, I'm going to be using Daisy UI, which allows you to style native HTML elements using Tailwind utility classes. So it's very lightweight. So let's go ahead and our template here, and I'll create a section. And for that, I'm going to use Daisy and create an input with a label. Span. And this is going to be for my first name. Also in here, I need an input of type text, and I'll put a placeholder on here for first name. And then I'm going to set a class as input. And on my label, I need a class for floating label. So let's see what that looks like. And you see that we have a nice looking UI element for our first name. So I'm going to copy that down and create my last name. See, we have both of those. So let's go ahead and apply a little bit of spacing here. So we have our fields to collect our user information. Let's go ahead and create some action buttons. So we're going to do one for save and delete so that we can add this document to the database. So in here, I want a button. duplicate that. So I need two buttons. I need one for creation. And for that button, I need it to be green. So we're going to use the success. Let's go ahead and style those out. On my div, I'm gonna space it out a little bit more. So set a gap Y of 5, just to separate the buttons from the UI a little bit. So I only want one button to be showing at a time. So let's go ahead and read our user document. So we're going to only display our delete button whenever we truly have a document in the database. So if our record is not yet created, we're going to hide the delete button. To do that, we're going to use a vif. I want to say user document dot get data and ID. So if our user document has an ID, that means it's in the database, and we're going to show the delete button indicating that we can delete that record. Otherwise, we're going to show the create button. We just throw else on there. So right now you can see we only have access to the create button. So let's go ahead and bind the user document to our user section here. So first name and last name, so that we can collect that information and store it on the proxy, and then have the ability to write that to the database. So if I go in on my first name, I'm going to go ahead here and bind my value and make that to the user document, and we're getting the first name. Next, I want to add input handler. So for this, we're going to capture the event, and I just want to type it right now as any. I'm not going to worry about any TypeScript. So whenever there's an input, we're going to write that to the user document. The user document dot set data, and we want to set the first name to the target value. And let me just copy that down onto my last name. Let's go ahead and update these to last name. Let's go ahead and check that. All right, so for my first name and last name, I'm binding the value to the user document, and I'm also implementing an input handler, which when there's an input, I'm gonna be writing that input data into the proxy. So let's see if that works so far. So we can see we have these logs in our console here. And if you didn't watch the first video in the series, I'll just leave a card here. You can go and take a look at that. But that would explain all the logging that you would see coming from the Collection-Proxy. So if I investigate this, I'll see that I input a last name, and my final data is first name and last name. So we can see that we're truly collecting the input and storing it on the proxy. So let me implement this a little bit further, where I can use my create button to go off and create this user in the database. So I just need to add a click handler on my create button. we call create user, and let's go ahead and implement that. So we're going to make this async. And for this operation, I'm going to want to do this on a batch. So let me go and import the batch from Firestore. So for this, we need the Firestore and the right batch. So I want to await my user document .create, and we're creating that on a batch. And after we create, we want to commit our batch, and then we also want the user document, and we want to replace the data. So this is necessary so that we can clear out our form. So we call the user document .replace data, so our form clears out and we can enter a new user. And we also want to call setDoc so that we generate a new ID for our proxy. So that should give me what I need for creating this user. If I look in my database, I see that we have no records right now. So I'm going to go ahead in here and type in a user and call create. And we can see the create operation kicking off and our form cleared out. And if we take a look in our database here, we can see that we have one user and it has the first and last name that we stored. So we can see that that's working. Let me just go ahead and create another user. So now we have two users. So another thing I want to do here is to present all the users that have been created in this database in a table so that we can see and interact with them. So let's go ahead and implement a table, and we're going to be pulling that in from Daisy again. So we have our table, and in our table we need a T head, and in our T head we need a T row. Then in our T row we're going to need some TDs. So I'll leave my first TD empty. Then we have two additional. One's going to be for our first name. Name. So we can see that taking shape. So I want to tag our table with the Daisy class of table. So that's going to let it show up as a table, and we can see how it starts to represent. I also want to have some outline on this table. So I'll go ahead and add a border, and I want to make that rounded. Nice. So see, we have a basic table set up here. So we have our table head, which is showing our first and last name. So let's go ahead and implement our table body. And for our table body, we are going to need a table row. And then in our table row, we need a TD. We're going to need 3 of those. So I did make a mistake in the table head. It's not supposed to be TDs, it's supposed to be THs. So we see it shows a little bit different here. So we have a few users in our collection right now, and we want to pull those out into our proxy. So what we're going to be using for that is an array. So we're going to store all our users into an array, but we're going to do that through the Collection-Proxy. So let's grab an instance of the Collection-Proxy. We're going to call that users collection. and that's going to be equal to collection name to users. And we're in view, we want to have reactivity, so we want to set data to a reactive array. And then we're going to go ahead and use this in our T-body. So on our TR, we want to generate as many TRs as records that we have in our database. So I'm going to use a v-for on this. And for this, I'm going to pull each row as a user. And I need the index. And I want to get it from the users collection dot get data. So for each user I want to render that index, and we're going to add a +1 on this because it's 0 based. And then for our first name column, we want user first name. And then our last name column, we're going to grab the user last name. So I perform a refresh, I don't see any records showing up in here. And that's because we're not fetching the documents into the user's collection proxy. So I want to do that in unmounted. So whenever the view component mounts, start down here. So whenever the view component mounts, I want to call the user's collection and tell it to get documents. And that's it. We see our documents show up in here. Add another user. We see show up in real time, and that's because we are using our reactive array. So I'll add a little bit more styling on my table here. So from Daisy, they have a table zebra. Let's go ahead and use that. So we get alternating color on our rows. So we see we can create users. We see them show up in our table. The next thing I want to do is when I click on a row, I want to use that row to populate my form. So it should fill out in the user, and then that should present our delete button because we're clicking on a record that's in the database. It's going to identify that there's an ID and then give us the opportunity to delete it. So let's go ahead and do that. First, I want the rows to, I guess, identify as clickable. So I'm going to change the cursor style whenever we hover over. So let's go for my row section here. Set a class for cursor pointer on that. So with that, you see we have a hand showing that this is a clickable item. So next thing I need here is a click handler, and we're going to set that to user document, and we're going to replace the data with the user at this row. So if I click on the user, we see that filling in our form. So we would want to be able to delete, but we have not implemented that functionality yet. So let's go ahead and take care of that. So we'll come in here to our delete button and add a click handler. So for this, I'm going to call delete user. Let's go ahead and implement that. So for this, I need a batch, and I need to await the delete on the batch and then commit the batch. And for this, I also want to replace the data in my form and set a new document. So we're calling setDoc here because whenever we delete a document from our database, we don't want that ID to be reused when we create another document. So we make sure that we're generating a new document ID. So with that, we should be able to delete our user. Let's just do a refresh on here. If I click on the first user and go delete, we see that it disappears. Second user, delete. If I take a look at my database, I can see that the records are being deleted. So now we have all users deleted, but we're still seeing our table here. So I'm just going to go ahead and only make the table visible whenever we have at least one item. So I just need to go to my class here for the table. And I'm just going to go ahead and bind it. So now I want to use an object. And we're going to place our class back in here as true. And then we're going to add our hidden class. So we only want the table to be hidden if we get the user's collection and the get the data. And the data is going to be an array. So we're going to check the length. And if that length is 0, that means we have no records. And we'll go ahead and hide the table. So this doesn't work on the table for some reason. So it needs to be moved to our table container. So again, I'm going to go ahead and bind this in here. And right here. So let's go and revert this back to where it was. And we see our table is now hidden. So let's go ahead and add our first user. And we can see our table show up. Nice. So it seems like we're done with the table section, so I'll just collapse that for now and then continue working on the rest of the sections. So now we want to go ahead and start adding in some additional features on here. I want to go out and add in the email and phone. So we're going to go and create another section right underneath our first and last name. So I'm going to create a div. And for that, now I want to create another label with a span. And this is going to be for my phone. Let's just create our input down here. And for this, I'm going to set it as an email, a placeholder, and set that to phone. And class for input. And this is using Daisy UI. So on my label, I want to add a class for floating label. And let's go see. So we have our phone field showing up here. And let me just copy that down so we can create our email. So floating label for an email. For this, I want to set it to an email. And we're also going to need to update this label. So we have our two fields here, and let's go style it out a little bit, some separation. Here we have it. So let's go and bind some documents on here. So I want to create a proxy for email. So we're creating a proxy for email. We're tying that to the emails collection, and we're going to set its data to a reactive object. And this is where we're getting into nested collections. So to set a nested collection on a collection proxy, all we have to do is set a parent and use another proxy as the parent. So we're creating an email proxy, and we're going to set the parent for the email proxy to our user, and that's going to nest the email document on our user document. So that's how you would do paths or nested collections. And you can do this infinitely, so you can go out and create all your different proxy documents and then just append them, or use them as parents. So for our email document, we're calling the collection, we're setting the collection name to emails. We're setting our data so we have reactivity when we use this component in Vue. And then we're setting a parent because we don't want this email document to be stored at the top level of our database. We want it to be nested on our user. So we're providing our user as a parent here. And similarly, if we had a company that we wanted to nest this user into, then we would just set a parent on the user to that company, and then we would have that 3-level nesting where the email would be nested in the user and the user would be nested in the company. So we have our email document. Let's go ahead and duplicate that down and create a phone document. For this, we want to set this to phones. And same parent of user, we're going to be nesting the phones and the emails on the user. So let's go and bind that into our template here. So for the phone, I'm just going to break these down. Bind our value to our phone document, and we want to get the data. And for the phone, we're going to extract the number. So we're storing these as objects, so when we need to attach additional information, we can. So for phone, we want to refer to it as phone number. And if you have additional properties that you wanted to append to the phone object, you could do stuff like phone type. So we have our value set, and we want to add an @input handler. And for that, we want to update our phone document. I want to set its data and set the number to the eTarget value. And let me go ahead and copy these down to our email. Just want to update this. For email, we want to do email address. Let's go ahead and take a look at this right now. So if I type something on my phone, I can see that showing up in our logging. Same thing for email. So email is showing up as phone. So let's go ahead and see what's happening there. So we're using the wrong proxy. So let's update this to the email document. And we'll just go ahead and try that again. So for phone, we're logging for phone, and email, we're logging for email. All right, so we covered our nesting, showing how to set up nested collections using the collection proxy. And remember, you can nest as far as you want. So let's go ahead and have this do something now. So whenever our component gets mounted, we're going out and we're pulling in all our users from the database. Whenever we create our user, we want to also create the phone and the email that we captured. So I'm just going to come in here and await the phone document. And we're creating on the same batch so that they're all committed atomically. And also await the email document. So when we create our phone and our email, we want to also go ahead and replace their data. So we're going to have a full clearing of our form. It's for a phone document and our email document. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. If I take a look in my database, we currently have no records. So let me create our first one. Go ahead and hit create here. And we can see that we created our user, we created our phone, and we created our email. If I go and inspect this, I can see that we're passing the payload as number for our phone, and for our email, we're passing our address as the email address. Similarly here for user, we're passing our first and last name. And if I take a look in my database, in the users collection, I have one user. I can see the user details, but I can also see the nested collections for phone. And we can see that we captured that phone number. And then for email, we captured the email address. So we can clearly see nested collections working. So we have the information stored, but we're not presenting it. Because right now, if I click on my user, even though I have a phone and email captured, it's not showing up in my UI here. So what I want to do is whenever our user ID changes, that means we have a user pulled in to our form, we want to also go out and fetch their associated phone and emails. So for that, I'm going to be pulling in the watch effect from view. And let's go ahead and use that in our template. So if my user document and the get data, and I want to check the ID. So if my user document has an ID, I want to also go out and pull in my phone document. I want to get documents. All right. So there's one thing to this. We are calling for documents, which is going to return us multiple documents, and we only want to store one. So in the collection proxy, when you call your get documents, you can also provide a callback. So if we set our first parameter here as a function, it's going to hand us the snapshot and the collection. So what it's doing here, it's giving us the ability to extract the data that we need. So we know we only care about one email or phone record. So our proxy is set up to be an object, not an array, because we're only going to care about one single record. So providing a callback it gives us the ability to handle the outcome ourselves. So what I want to do in here is to make sure that we do have documents. So if not snapshot.empty, so if we have at least one document, I want to update my collection. So I want to call collection.replace data, and I'm going to replace that with the snapshot and get the docs, and I'm going to only grab the first doc and then its data. So that will pull in the first phone document and store it on my proxy. So let's go ahead and perform a refresh and test that. So if I go ahead and click on my user, I can see I get my phone number coming back in. So I want to also do that for my email. So my email get documents, and there's two ways to do this. If you have no additional options, you can just provide a function as your first parameter to get documents. But if you wanted to apply additional options, so these are the different options you can provide in here: size and real time and stuff like that. If you wanted to provide multiple, then you can put your callback in a function, and it's the same signature with snapshot and collection. And we want to say if not snapshot.empty, we're going to place our data with the first document. And running that, let's test this again. If I click on my user, I can see my phone and my email gets populated. And we still have everything in real time. If I go to, say, my email and I change anything, we can see it update in our UI in real time. So that's really cool. All right, guys. So whenever my user information changes, that also causes the trigger to go out and pull in my phone and emails. So let's add another user here. Now we have our two users. If I go in John Wick, I can see that we pull in all the information for that user, and I can just switch. Delete our user. We should see all the records being removed. So it seems like our phone and our email are not being cleared. So we just need to go to our delete handler, and we need to update those. So our phone document, we want to call replace data, and same thing for our email document here. So let's go ahead again, do a refresh. I can pull Jane Doe in and delete that record, and our form is completely clear. So that's for our nested collection. So the next thing I have going on here is for relationship, and I'm going to try to make this one as quick as possible. So the nesting here is happening on the user document. So we're saying that the phone and the email, they're directly related to the user, and we're nesting them on the user. But if I had data in the root collection, not directly on the user. How would I associate that data with this user? So let's go ahead and test that out. So first of all, let me quickly just create a piece of UI here. And what we're gonna add in for this is an address. So under user, I'll just create another quick section. And inside of here, another label with a span. And for this, we want it to be an address. We need our input of type text. And we want a placeholder for the address and our class for an input. And then on our label, we need a class of floating label. So that gives us our address field. Let's just break this down. Then we're going to create a proxy for our address. Set our data again to a reactive object. We don't need a parent. All right, so now we're creating an address that's not nested on the user. So there would be no direct path to find all the addresses related to this user. So when we store this address, we want to go ahead and set owners. So setting owners, I want to set the owner as the user document. And what that's going to do, it's going to append the user path into the belongs to array for the addresses. So now I would be able to use array contains and query this for the user. So let's go ahead and see how that works. So let's store our address whenever we create our user. So our address document, we want to create that on the batch. And let's go bind that into our input. I want to bind the value to the address document and same strategy, get data. And we want to get address 1. And then whenever we input data, we want to set our address document address 1 to the eTarget value. So that will allow us to collect the address information. And then whenever we hit our create button, we want to go ahead and create our address. And we also want to clear out that address component. Same thing here, when we delete our address, we want to clear out our address component. And then the main thing here is whenever we load our component and we identify that the ID has changed, we're going out, we're pulling in the phone document and the email document, but we also want to pull in the address. So the address document we want to call get documents. And now we're using an object, because what we need to do here is run a query. to find all the addresses that are associated with this user. So for that, I can specify my query here, and to that I need to provide it a function, and that's going to give me a reference to the collection. Once I have that reference, I can use the query from Firestore. So I need to go and pull in the query from Firestore. And I also need a where, because I want to narrow down my records. So for here, I can return a query and then call the query from Firestore, hand it the ref, and then I'm gonna say where. I can write my condition now. I want to look at the belongs to array, or array contains, and what I'm looking for in this array is an item with the user document path. So I want the user document that get its doc, and on its doc is a path. So with me setting the user document as the owner of the address document, it now adds the path from the user document into the belongs to relationship of the address that I'm creating. And now we have that association where we can use the array contains query to go out and find all the addresses where the belongs to array contains this user path. So that's what we're doing in our query here, where we're using the belongs to property and calling array contains on it and accessing the user document. And when we call get doc, we have a Firestore doc on which we can get the path. So that helps with us querying this document. And because we have a single address document, and whenever you run a query, you're going to get back a collection, we need to strip this down to a single document to be able to store on our address. So let's go ahead and provide a callback. And for the callback, we need to receive the snapshot and the collection. And then we're just going to go through the same process here, where we're going to check if the snapshot is not empty. That means if we did find an address, we want to replace the data in our address document to the first address that we found. So if I go ahead and perform a refresh on that and go through on my form here, I'll go and create a new user. Let's set an address. Let's fill all of this out. Let's do the phone. Lay out my console here and do a create. And then we can see that we're creating a bunch of documents here. So we did create our user document along with our phone and email. And here we have our address document. So if I take a look in here, I can see that the address property has been set. The address one property has been set. So let's take a look in our database and see what that looks like. So looking in our database here, we can see we have our users collection at top level, but we also have our addresses collection at top level. And what I was talking about before is that having a user and then directly nesting other collections on that user, it's quite easy to go and find all the emails and phones related to that user. However, if you had an adjacent collection, so like how we have addresses here, there's no direct association between users and addresses. So that's how we are able to use the belongs to relationship to make that association. And just by setting the user document as a owner of the address document, it now appends this belongs to relationship, and we can see where the user path has been extracted out and placed in this belongs to. So now if I go back to my UI here and we click on our user, we can see that all the information is coming in. So I did cover nested collections, so we understand how to set up nested collections using the collection proxy. So it's just a matter of setting a parent and then applying another collection as the parent, and that will associate those paths. And then for relationships, you can set owners, and owners can be set using a single collection or multiple collections. So if you wanted this address to belong to multiple documents, you just provide it with an array, and now you can nest a bunch of different collections inside of here. So I hope you guys liked this video and found value. And if you guys have any suggestions or any use cases that you want to explore, just leave a comment and make sure to like and subscribe to the video, and check me out on GitHub.